Hey everyone, Alex with High Desert Armizare here. Decided to make this video that I'm simply going to be titling, What is Spreier Dirty Boxing? So Spreier Dirty Boxing is the name that has been given to the synthesis and the amalgamation of several historical martial arts sources that I practice and I teach. That being said, everything has a base. So we do have sources that I will reference back to and point to and say, here, this is where this comes from. This is why we do things this way. The first source, one that I don't explicitly use a lot anymore, but is still provided the bones for the system, or the base of the pyramid, if I'm going to just start throwing analogies out there, is Fiore. That was my first introduction to historical martial arts, and still really forms, as I said, the base of the pyramid for what Spreier Dirty Boxing is. Other sources that we use are Zach Wild's English Master of Defense from the 1700s, where he is dealing with and talking about small sword, broadsword, wrestling, and quarterstaff. So it's a nice holistic system, covers, point work, cutting work, pole arms, what to do when you don't have anything in your hands. The other source that we use for weapons is Giuseppe Ceri's 1800s work on the bastone, or the two-handed walking stick. That was an eye-opener in terms of basic body mechanics that, say, Fiore doesn't cover. Because when you were training with Fiore, the assumption was, hey, you know how to do this stuff. Ceri does not make those assumptions. He's writing at a different time where instruction manuals were very, very different. So he's like, cool, this is how you move your body with a thing into both of your hands. Rock on. The third and final source that I use mostly for Spreier Dirty Boxing, that as a historical document, is not a weapons system. It's Daniel Mendoza's Art of Boxing. That sort of forms the core of what you will see with the empty hand stuff, mixed in with the wrestling from Zach Wild and the wrestling from Fiore. It's all there. So, that being said, that's Spreier Dirty Boxing. It is my personal mix, based on my years of training and my research, of those sort of four primary sources: Fiore, Wild, Ceri, Mendoza, but also the influences of all of my friends who also research and teach their own systems, and what they have shown me, and the lessons I have learned from them and picked out their principles, which includes, Damon Stith with Hama, and specifically, North African stick fighting, Mike Sherba with Georgian sword and buckler play, Jim Emmons with the crash courses into Italian saber, and more recently French small sword and French contrapoint fencing, Russ Mitchell with Hungarian saber, and honestly, too many to name. I know I'm forgetting people, and I apologize for that ahead of time. But that's the nature of martial arts, is that as I move through the art, I'm picking up these pieces and I'm picking up these systems, and I'm finding a way for them to make sense to me. And so now, as I turn around and have been teaching, I've been even more trimming away at the things that didn't make sense, or they made sense, but I found something else and a better way to explain it, etc., 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 and narrowing things down into the set of what I do now call Spreier Dirty Boxing. So first up, to talk about the weapons-based side of things, my goal with Spreier Dirty Boxing was to create a weapon-agnostic system, meaning whatever you pick up or whatever you have in your hands, you can use this system and be effective. May not be the most efficient, may not be the most effective, but you will be effective at, our number one rule, which is don't die. Okay? So for demonstration purposes today, I have a broadsword, which is light enough that it really is truly more of a spadroon. It's kind of got that cut and thrust capability. And then for the two-handed weapon demonstration, I've got a lightsaber, because lightsabers are cool. So starting with basic principles of the art, you have two body positions that you'll find. So the first one is the full body, which is what I'm in now. My hips are square onto you, my shoulders are square onto you, my feet can be staggered, and most often are staggered, but that idea is my full body is facing you. The next one is a half body, or a profiled position. So here, my hips are now facing perpendicular-ish to you, but you only get to see about half of my body. I've narrowed my target window. To anybody who's done historical sword arts for a long time, these two body positions, they make a lot of sense, okay? And so we play around with both of them. For the most part, when we are using a sword in one hand, or a stick, or whatever we have in one hand, we're gonna tend toward this profiled position. Just because, again, my main goal is to not die, so turning sideways on gives you less opportunity to hit me than if I am fully squared up on you. Okay? So the next thing to talk about is sort of breaking the target body up and how we do that. So many different arts across the years and across the globe have done this in slightly different ways. This is my simple take on it. So your body can be broken down into high and low, inside and outside. So high and low comes at, really, if you think about your waist. So not your hips, your waist. A good thing to think about is like where the bottom of your ribs comes down, kind of from there, like to your belly button-ish is a good line. So about here-ish on me. Everything up here is high. Everything down here is low. It's that simple. Your body is going to be a little bit different. Your weapon will be a little bit different. So your definitions of high and low might be a little funkier, might be a little bit different than mine. That's okay. The nature of Spreier Dirty Boxing is that some of these things are kind of nebulous. You make them work for you. So now we've established high and low. We're going to establish inside and outside. Inside and outside, to use fancy terms, are if I stand profile to you, because this just makes life a little bit easier, the anterior is my inside. The posterior is my outside. Fancy terms. The inside are my squishy bits. The outside is my booty. So if I'm here, this is my inside, this is my outside. If I switch it up, this is my inside, this is my outside. It gets a little bit trickier when we come to two-handed weapons, but we'll get there. But in general, we have inside, outside, high, low. So those are important concepts to think about when we're talking in broad terms, really about teaching and trying to explain to somebody what action I want them to take, right? I'm not going to sit there in my head and be facing up with somebody and go, haha, I am going to throw a blow to their high inside line. Yeah, I don't think that way. I don't know any martial artists that think that way. But when you have somebody new, you have to talk in these terms so that they understand what you mean. Or if you have somebody who's coming from a completely different system, having sort of these terms helps to start translating. So one of the other things that I will do in Spreier Dirty Boxing is I don't number the cuts. I don't find anything wrong with numbering cuts. It just doesn't work for me in my brain. So instead what I have the idea of a forehand and a backhand. So again, anybody who's ever done a racket sport, your forehand is essentially dominant hand, palm swings forward. A backhand is dominant hand, back of the hand comes forward first. Cool. Now we can talk about, we have descending cuts, we have rising cuts, we have cuts that are kind of more in the middle-ish. But that does become a bit of a mouthful when I'm talking to people. So in general, I will default to a forehand, means the most common, which is a descending forehand cut. A backhand is just a backhand descending cut. Then I'll say a rising forehand, rising backhand, or a middle forehand, middle backhand. More often though, I won't prescribe the angle of the cut. I will tell the person what type of cut I want, whether it's forehand or backhand, and then I will tell them the target, because that will sort of naturally lead to some of these ideas of how, a rising cut or a descending cut or a middle cut. So just remember forehand, backhand, descending, rising, and middle, which is basically, it's somewhere horizontal-ish. Again, it's a lot of gray areas in this circle. There's never any hard lines between this is a descending cut, this is now a middle cut. Not really. Okay, so we've talked high and low, inside, outside. We've talked about how I will talk about strikes. So descending backhand, descending forehand, rising forehand and backhand, middle forehand and backhand. So let's talk about the guards in Spreier Dirty Boxing. And here is where people who know are going to look at this and go, 90% of this is Zach Wild's system. Yes, it is. The pieces that are not directly from his small sword and broadsword that I use are things that I have pulled in from other small sword sources and other French contrepoint sources or other traditions out there that are in Wild, but he does not explicitly call them out as being used this way. So, for the most part, the two primary guards that you can use to defend your body are the same name as the sides. So I have an inside guard and an outside guard, named for what they protect. If I take an inside guard, you can see my sword is between your sword and my inside bits. If I go to an outside, my sword is between your sword and my outside bits. Now, I've mentioned, I think, a couple times, Spreier Dirty Boxing being very nebulous with definitions. The same applies to guard positions. Okay, so right now with this, I have a pretty decent amount of hand protection. So when I take an inside guard, I can afford to have that point relatively sloped down. Go ahead and show you from the side. Right, I can have it sloped down quite a bit. If I didn't have this hand protection, say my lightsaber, I might sit here as sort of an aggressive way to get your attention, but as a defense, I'm going to bring it back almost vertical. Because if I don't have any hand protection here, something hits, it slides down, it hits my hand. That sucks. I broke rule number 1. So just know that when I describe these guard positions, they're not a static position. It is a continuum. So inside is, fully extended out all the way to vertical blade alignment on this side. Again, protecting my inside. It also is a continuum vertically. I can be up here, I can be down here. This is still an inside guard. So if I were to be fencing and someone were to take a swipe at my leg, rather than doing something else, I can always just squat and put my sword there. Same thing for the outside. I can be really extended, I can be withdrawn, I can be high, I can be low. Those are both. Any of those positions are still outside guard or inside guard. It depends on the tool that I'm using. Right? If I have a small sword, or if I'm being very thrust oriented, my guards are going to be far more extended with my point directly at my opponent. If I'm using something a little more cut oriented, I'm going to give a little bit of extra especially if I'm facing somebody who is cutting at me, because I'm going to kind of need that. And again, if I have a stick or something with no hand protection, you know, the less hand protection I have, the more that my defense gets drawn back into my body and becomes vertical. The more hand protection I have, the more extended and the more parallel to the ground my guard position can be. Okay? So that's inside and outside as our primary defensive mechanisms. We also have what I call half circle and second, which really are just half circle is I take an inside guard and I let my point drop. Inside guard, let my point drop. If I'm being fancy with it, you can see why it gets the name half circle. My point comes in and it drops. I make a nice little half circle in the air. So this technically is defending my inside low line, right? Because it's more down here. I'm not necessarily going to bring this one all the way up in this direction. I can, but in general, if I'm taking this position, I'm really specifically focusing on my inside low line. So inside line, which mostly covers inside high, but can also cover inside low. Half circle, inside low line, can also cover inside high, can also cover outside high, right? So it's kind of that same continuum idea. Second is the same low line idea, but now for my outside. So here my nails are pointed up. Here I flip over, my nails are pointed down. Same idea, it's an outside guard with the tip dropped. This is protecting my low outside line. However, I'm going to take it on that continuum. It can also come up high, but we'll talk about a slightly better positioning for that. But it can also cover my high inside line, right? So I can come from here, up, those sorts of things. So those sort of form the four corners of a box, right? Inside, outside, half circle, second. You also have something that is very specifically referred to as the hanging guard or falloon, something else. So that is going to look really, really similar to sort of a second, but it's held way up high and I'm looking directly underneath my blade and my blade is hanging down this way. This is specifically really good for covering my high line or my high inside line. So if somebody's coming and doing big chops to my head, rather than necessarily trying to defend here, I'm going to come up into this position. Again, there's a continuum all the way out, pulling back closer to what other sources will call a St. George, but hanging guard. And again, hanging can kind of roll through. Hanging can even be taken on the other side, but that tends to be more of an in the moment thing. That's not necessarily a guard position you're going to hang out in. Okay? Pun intended. The final guard position. So we have the four corners of our box. We have protecting our head specifically. And then we have sort of our indexing position, our ready position. The basic, hey, your lizard brain has said something is wrong. Boom, you drop into this position. And that is sort of a neutral guard. In a way, it doesn't protect any specific line. It's not protecting my inside, my outside, my high, or my low. But what it does is act as a deterrent. So this is called medium by some sources, middle by other sources. Zach Wilde gives us the opportunity to call this one unicorn, and I love that, and we are sticking with that one. So unicorn guard, half body. My sword arm is straight out from my shoulder. My sword is straight in front of my body. Again, I'm not particularly defending this side, not particularly defending here, not particularly high, nor low. I'm just right smack dab in the middle. As I said, it's a threat deterrent. If I have a lot of hand protection and a long thrusty blade, this is pointed directly at you. You keep yourself and your crazy business over there. More cutty blade, it can kind of start coming a little bit more vertical, but it's still sloped towards my opponent. Okay? We do see this in some sources. I am not a fan of it. So we are sloped to some degree. Okay? That is, again, the most neutral position we come to. If you just pick up a sword and you get ready to fight, boom. That's the position you come to, is unicorn. Because all of the other positions that we used are both defensive guards, but as I said, they're places you can wait and hang out. But in doing so, I'm making what's called an invitation. So for instance, if I take an inside guard, I am telling you, I am communicating to you, this is closed. You're not coming here. But look at that. Look at that shoulder. Go ahead and take a big old chunk of meat out of that shoulder. Because I want you to. Because I'm setting up something. Okay, similarly, if I take, second, I'm saying, look at this lovely beard, this lovely face. You want to knock me down a peg or two. That's fine. Because I'm setting something up that I can do. So the other guards act as defenses, they act as invitations, they act as the end point for blows. Unicorn is not an invitation. Unicorn is a position in which if you want to do anything to me, you've got to get through this first. There's no invitation, there's no lines that I'm saying like, oh look, I've got this pretty thing. You got to get through this point first. Now that I've rambled on and on and on about some basics, let's get to some simple drills that you can do. So the most basic drill that we have, weapon in hand, is I crib off of Zach Wild. We call it the throwing the guards drill. So he has a version in his text. Again, as I explained, I took that, I adapted it slightly, I turned it into something new. So this is Spreier Dirty Boxing's throwing the guards drill. What we're going to do in this drill is we are going to transition ourselves between all 6 of our guard positions. This is getting us used to handling the weapon, it's getting us used to the guard positions, it's getting us used to moving between those in a very thoughtful and specific way. So we are going to start off standing in a full body with our weapon grounded on or just held loosely on our dominant hand side. You are then going to lift the sword and do a little bit of a flourishy thing, however fancy you want to make it is however fancy you want to make it. But the end point is we're going to cut and we're going to come to an inside guard. Okay? And I just did that with a little step forward. I went from full body, step forward into half body. Okay? So full body, and step forward into an inside guard. I'm going to transition myself to an outside guard. So I bring the point up a little bit and I cut to the outside. Okay? For right now, I am maintaining this static half body posture. We'll talk about that in a minute. So I cut to my inside, I go to outside. From outside, I'm going to bring my tip kind of back up again. I'm going to cut down into half circle. I'm going to bring the tip around. I'm going to cut into second. Here I'm going to do a bigger cut. So these other cuts have come from the wrist. This one's going to come more from the elbow. I'm going to cut straight down into unicorn. And then also using that elbow, I'm going to bring my sword back up, come down, and I'm going to do a rising backhand blow up into hanging guard. From here, I can bring the point around and cut inside, outside, half circle, second, unicorn, hanging. And I can just repeat this ad nauseum. Okay. Boom. Does not matter if you are right-handed or left-handed. If I am a left-hander, same thing. Sword comes up into my inside guard, my outside guard, my half circle, my second, my unicorn, my hanging. My inside, my outside, my half circle, my second, my unicorn, and finally, my hanging. Okay, so as I said, first several iterations of that, go ahead and keep your feet static. Just stand there. You can stand there in half body. You can also stand there in full body and do it inside, outside, half circle, second, unicorn, hanging. All you're doing at that point is creating sort of a pathway for your brain and your body to start learning this skill and to start learning these positions and go, okay, I go here, 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 here. Cool. Two other footwork styles that we will do with this drill. One is to do everything on a passing step. So a passing step is simply your common walking step in a way, where one foot passes by the other one. So what that's going to look like is I'm going to be in my full body, everything set here. As I cut to my inside, my dominant side foot is going to come forward. Boom. As I cut to my outside, my other foot is going to come forward. As I cut to half circle, I take another step forward. As I cut to second, I take another step forward. As I cut to unicorn, I take another step forward. And finally, as I cut to hanging, I take a step forward. Now I cheated a little bit because of the camera at my distance, but let me show you what it looks like then. So running sideways through throwing the guards drill on the pass. Inside, outside, half circle, second, medium, hang. I can do it going backwards as well. Inside, outside, half circle, second, medium. Okay. So we've done it static, we've done it off of the pass. One of the other ways we can do is really focusing on that cut and thrust situation that I prefer to bring to Spreier Dirty Boxing. So we're not just a cut system, we're not just a thrust system, we use both. You have the options, use your options. So for that one, the footwork winds up looking a little bit different. So we're going to start off in our half body. Okay. And I'm starting in my half body and I'm keeping my sword down like we did before. I'm going to come up and into an inside guard. Now at this point, what I'm going to do for my inside guard is I'm going to do a little half lunge and I'm going to thrust. As I recover from my lunge, so as I come back to my ready position, I'm going to transition my sword to an outside guard and thrust. On the recovery, I go to a half circle and thrust, second, thrust, unicorn, thrust, hanging, thrust, recover. Okay, again, I'll show you the side view. So, the side view of the cut and thrust drill. Again, I'm going to start off in my half body. I'm going to come to my inside, thrust. On the recovery, outside, thrust. Half circle, thrust. Second, thrust. Unicorn, thrust. Hanging, thrust. Back to unicorn. And done.